Good evening, and welcome, dear listener. Come in from wherever the day has left you, and let the door close softly behind you. And let the noise of the hours grow quiet and small and far away. Tonight there is nowhere you need to go, and nothing you need to carry. And there is all the time there is, and a little more besides. Tonight we are going to travel a very long way, very slowly, to a warm country a long way east, to the wide slow rivers and the white marble courts of a golden empire. And we are going to walk together through the whole gentle life of a man who loved a woman so completely that he raised, in her memory, the most beautiful building the earth has ever known. You may already know the shape of it, even with your eyes closed. A great white dome, pale as milk, pale as the moon, lifted above a long still pool of water, and 4 slender towers standing at its corners like candles that never burn down. That is where we are going, in the end. But we will get there slowly, as you climb into sleep. One soft stare at a time. Have you ever wondered what it would be to see it just as the light first touches it, in the grey hush before the sun is fully up, when the gardens are wet and silent, and there is no one on the long paths at all? A single oil lamp burning low on a marble terrace, its small flame doubled in the black still water below. And then, very slowly, the first thread of rose light coming up out of the east, over the river, and the great pale dome beginning to catch it, beginning to warm from grey to cream to the faintest blush of pink, as though the marble itself were waking, breathing, blushing, at the beauty of the morning. That is the one small image to hold as you drift tonight. A lamp on the water, a white dome catching the first rose light across the still river. Nothing louder than that, nothing sharper than that, just the quiet turning of the light. If stories told softly like this one help carry you down into sleep, you are welcome here any night you need us. And it does help this quiet channel keep going if you tap the little button to follow along, so the next long calm night finds its way to you without your having to look for it. There is no hurry to do it now. Your hands may already be still and warm beneath the covers, and that is exactly as it should be. You can leave it for the morning or for another night and lose nothing of the story. And before we set out, if you would like to, you might leave one small word in the comments below, only a few letters, telling us which town you are listening from tonight, and the hour on your clock as your eyes begin to close. It is a gentle thing, on a night when sleep can feel like a lonely country, to scroll down and see the small quiet company of others drifting off at the same hour, from 100 different cities and farmhouses and small dark rooms all over the turning world, all of them settling, all of them breathing slower, all of them letting the day go. You are not awake alone tonight. So let the lamp beside you grow dim now, if it is not dim already. Let the room cool a little around you. Draw the covers up to where they feel best, and let your shoulders come down from wherever the day has held them, one quiet inch, and then another. Let the pillow take the whole weight of your head so that your neck holds nothing at all. Let your jaw soften, and your hands, and the long muscles of your legs. Breathe in, slowly through the nose, and let it out even more slowly. And feel how the out-breath is longer than the in-breath, and how, with each one, you sink a small measure deeper into the warm, still dark. There, that is all you need to do tonight. I will do the walking for both of us, and you have only to listen, and to let the sound of it carry you down. Let us begin, then, a very long way from here, in a warm and golden world. Picture, first, a great flat country in the north of India, in the early years of the 17th century, 400 years ago, and a little more. It is a land of wide, slow rivers, of the broad brown Yamuna and the broader Ganges beyond it, rivers so wide and so unhurried that in the still hours of the morning they lie like sheets of hammered silver under the pale sky, barely seeming to move at all, Along their banks stand cities of rose-red sandstone and white marble walled cities with high gates. And beyond the walls the country opens out into a patchwork of green fields and mango groves and mustard blossom, flat and fertile and warm, reaching away to a hazy horizon where, on the clearest of mornings, far to the north, you might catch the faintest blue-white line of mountains, the great snows of the Himalaya, cool and distant and pure. This is the empire of the Mughals, at the very height of its wealth and its ease. It is among the richest kingdoms on the whole surface of the world, richer, in these years, than any kingdom of the cold and rainy West. Its treasuries are heavy with gold and silver, its markets loud with the goods of half the world, and its court is a place of such splendour that the few travellers who come all the long way from Europe go home stammering, unable quite to make their countrymen believe what they have seen. Let us go slowly through that warm world, before we meet the man at the core of our story, so that when he is born into it, we understand exactly the cradle of gold he is laid down in. The seasons turn there in a slow and certain wheel, and the whole life of the country turns with them. There is the long dry heat of the early summer, when the sky whitens and the land bakes and the people move slowly at the height of the day, resting in the deep shade of the courtyards where fountains play, and the air is cooled by screens of wet, sweet-smelling grass hung in the doorways. Then, when the heat is built and built until it can hardly be borne, come the monsoon rains. The great grey clouds rolling up from the south, and the first heavy drops on the hot dust, and then the downpour, warm and drumming and endless, filling the rivers, greening the whole country in a matter of days, so that the whole land seems to sigh and drink and turn a deep and living green. And then the cool bright winter, the kindest season, when the mornings are misty and soft, and the days are warm and gold, and the nights are cool enough for a blanket, and the gardens fill with roses and narcissus, and the fields with the yellow of the mustard flower. The mango trees blossom, and their scent hangs heavy and sweet in the warm evenings. This is the slow breathing of the country, in and out, dry and wet and cool, year upon year, patient as the rivers. And in that warm, patient country the Mughals had made themselves a home only a few generations before. They were newcomers, in truth, though by now they were newcomers no longer. They had come down, long ago, from the cool high country of Central Asia, from the line of great conquerors, from Timur the Lame, and, further back still, from the line of Genghis. The horseman of the northern steppe, the founder of their house in India, had been a prince named Babur, a restless and gifted man who had lost his own small mountain kingdom far to the north, and rather than sit and mourn it, had turned his horse south and come down through the passes into the great warm plains of India, and won himself an empire there, near enough 100 years before our story truly begins. Babur had loved gardens above almost all things, even in the heat and the dust of his new country, even in the middle of his wars. He had stopped to lay out gardens, cool green ordered gardens with running water and straight avenues of trees, for he came from a green mountain country, and he could not be at peace in a land without them. And that love of gardens, that longing for cool running water and green shade and ordered beauty, he passed down in the blood of his house, down through his son and his grandson, down and down, until it reached at last the man who would pour it, whole, into white marble. Remember the gardens. They run all through this story like the 4 small channels of water that run through every Mughal garden. We will come back to them again and again. After Babur came his son, and after his son came the great Emperor Akbar. And it was Akbar who truly made the empire vast and settled and secure. Akbar was one of the great rulers of the world, a broad-shouldered, curious, restless man who could neither read nor write, and yet who loved learning above gold, and who had wise men and poets and priests of every faith read aloud to him deep into the night. He drew the many peoples of his huge country toward him, rather than crushing them, marrying the daughters of the proud Hindu princes of the desert country to the west, taking their fathers and their brothers into his own government, ruling by a wide and generous tolerance that held the whole vast patchwork together far better than any wall of spears. Under Akbar, the empire grew calm and rich and sure of itself, and the arts of it flowered. The painting and the poetry and the music and the building, all of it drinking in the old traditions of the country and the newer ones the Mughals had carried down from the north, and mingling them into something new and glorious. It was into this settled golden peace in the last years of the great Akbar that the child of our story was born. He was born in the winter, in the cool kind season, in the great city of Lahore, in the year we would call 1592. He was a grandson of the Emperor Akbar, a son of the prince who would in time become the Emperor Jahangir, and his mother was a princess of the Rajputs, of that proud desert line of Hindu warriors whom the Mughals had drawn to themselves. So in the small warm body of this newborn child, two great streams of blood came together, the conquerors from the northern mountains and the ancient princes of that desert land, and both of them ran clear and strong in him all his life. His mother's people were builders of forts and palaces in rose-red stone, singers of long songs of love and loss, keepers of a fierce and tender honour. His father's people were the lords of the whole shining empire, and this child was the treasure of both. The old Emperor Akbar, his grandfather, was said to have loved the baby from the very first, and it was Akbar himself who gave him his name. He named him Khurram, which in the Persian tongue of the court meant joyous, or joyful, the joyous one, for the child brought joy simply by being. And the old emperor, near the end of his long reign, took the small warm weight of him into his arms as a kind of blessing on all that he had built. The astrologers of the court, bending over their charts and their tables of the stars on the night of the birth, murmured that the heavens were unusually kind, that this was a child marked for greatness and for a fortune out of the ordinary run of men, and whether or not the stars truly say such things, this much was true from the very beginning. The child Khurram was born into as much wealth and safety and love as any child on earth has ever known. He would never, in all his long life, know cold, or true hunger, or want. His cradle was gold, and the walls around it were the walls of the wealthiest empire in the world, and over it bent the faces of a grandfather who was one of history's great emperors, and a mother of ancient and honourable blood. Hold that soft picture as we go on. A winter child in a warm palace in Lahore, 400 years ago, wrapped and safe and loved, with the whole golden world waiting quietly for him to grow. The child grew, as children do, slowly and then all at once, and his early years were spent in the care of the old emperor and the great ladies of the palace, for it was the custom of that house that a favoured prince might be raised in the household of the emperor himself, close to the very heart of things. So the boy Khurram passed his first years not in some distant wing, but in the warm centre of the court, among the fountains and the deep cool halls and the gardens with their running water, watched over by grandmothers and aunts and nurses, dressed in soft silks, fed on sweet fruits and milk and honey, lulled to sleep on warm evenings by the sound of women singing low in the next room and the small ceaseless music of water falling into marble basins. It is a gentle thing to imagine, a small boy falling asleep to the sound of fountains in a palace 4 centuries ago, and it is, in its way, the whole spirit of the man he would become, for all his life he would reach after that sound. The sound of still water and cool gardens and peace. He was taught, as a prince must be, and taught well, by the finest scholars the empire could gather. He learned to read and to write in the flowing Persian script of the court, the language of poetry and government, and he learned the Arabic of the Holy Book, and something of the Turkish his ancestors had brought down out of the north, and the plainer speech of the country all around him, so that he could speak, when he chose, to almost any soul in his vast future kingdom. He was taught the long histories of his own line, the deeds of Timur and of Babur, and of his grandfather, so that he grew up knowing exactly whose blood he carried and what was one day expected of him. He learned mathematics and the movements of the stars, for the Mughals loved astronomy and kept careful watch on the wheeling of the heavens. He learned the poems of the great Persian masters, and could recite them, and came to love them. The long, sweet verses of love and longing and the slow turn of the age itself. And this too would matter, in the end, for he was a prince who felt the poetry of things deeply, and who would one day want his grief itself made into something as perfect as a poem. And because he was of the Mughal line he was taught, from a young age, the harder arts as well, the riding and the hunting and the handling of weapons and the ordering of men, for these princes were not raised to be soft ornaments, but to ride at the head of armies and to govern great provinces while still young. So the boy grew into a youth who could sit a horse all day, who could loose an arrow true, who knew how to carry himself among hard fighting men and be obeyed. He was, by all accounts that have come down to us, a handsome young man, straight and strong and grave, with a steady dark gaze and a quiet certain way about him, more serious than his brothers, more careful, more inward. Where others of his blood were loud or reckless or given to wine, he was measured and watchful and precise. And he had above all one gift that would shape everything, one love that set him apart from the first. He loved beautiful things, and he loved to make them. He loved fine buildings, and gardens laid out just so, and gems, and the exact and patient crafts of the workshop. Even as a young man he would spend hours among the jewellers and the architects and the garden makers of the court, watching, asking, learning, drawn to the slow making of perfect things as other men are drawn to the hunt or to the cup. This was the quiet fire in him. Hold it gently. In time it would build the wonder of the world. But there was another thing that came to him in his youth, the thing that our whole story truly turns upon. And it came, as such things so often do, in a garden at a season of festival, when he was still very young. The court of the Mughals kept a great bright market fair within the palace walls at certain seasons, a kind of gentle festival where the ladies of the court, veiled and unveiled, would keep stalls of silks and jewels and sweetmeats and small precious things, and the young princes would move among them in the warm evening light, and there was music and lamplight, and the scent of flowers and of roses distilled into perfume, and a soft happy murmur over everything. And it was there, in that lamplit garden of a festival evening, that the young prince first saw the girl he would love for the rest of his life. She was a girl of the court, of a great and noble Persian family that had risen high in the service of the empire, a family of ministers and poets and beautiful, clever women. Her own aunt was the most powerful lady of the whole realm, the beloved queen of the reigning emperor. And she herself, this girl, was by every account that has come down to us a beauty out of the old poems, dark-eyed and graceful and gentle, with a quick, warm intelligence behind her eyes, so lovely and so kind in her manner that those who saw her found it hard afterward to speak of anything else. Her given name meant, in the old tongue, something like the ornament, the chosen one, the treasured jewel of the palace, and that is what she was. When the young prince saw her across the lamplit stalls of the festival, among the silks and the sweetmeats and the soft music, something in him grew still and certain, as the whole rest of his careful, measured life would be still and certain. And he knew, as one sometimes simply knows, that here was the one. He was still only a youth, and she scarcely more than a girl. And it was not, in that world of arranged and stately marriages, a thing to be rushed. But from that evening on, they say, his heart was fixed, and it never after moved. They were betrothed, in the slow careful way of that court. And then they waited, as custom and the reading of the stars required, for some years before the marriage could be made. And in that time, we are told, the prince did not so much as look at another with the eye of love, though a prince of his standing might have had whatever he wished. He simply waited for her. And at last, when the stars were judged favourable and the years had passed, the wedding was made, and it was a wedding worthy of the wealthiest court beneath the sky. Picture it, softly, on the edge of sleep, the whole palace hung with lamps, thousands on thousands of small oil lamps burning in every window and along every wall and in the branches of the garden trees. so that the night itself seemed made of warm gold, the scent of 1,000 flowers and of rosewater and of sweet smoke, music playing, soft and sweet and endless, gold coins and jewels scattered among the crowds in blessing, sweetmeats given away by the great basketful, the whole city feasting for days. And there at its heart, the grave young prince and his lovely gentle bride joined at last, after the long patient waiting, in the warm lamplit dark. It was the year we now call 1612. He was in his early 20s, she was a little younger, and whatever else this story holds. And it holds a great sorrow near its heart, hold on to this first, that it began in joy, in a garden of lamps, between two people who had chosen each other and waited for each other, and who would from that night be almost never apart. For that was the wonder of their marriage, the thing that everyone who wrote of them remarked upon, in an age and a court where a great man might have many wives and think little of any of them. He loved her, only her, wholly and without wavering, all his life. He gave her a new name, a name the entire world would one day know, a name that meant the chosen one of the palace, the jewel of the palace, Mumtaz Mahal, and she was that to him, exactly that, the one chosen above all the treasures of the richest empire on earth. She travelled with him everywhere. When he rode out to govern a distant province, she went with him. When he rode out, in the harder years, on the long campaigns of empire, into the heat and the dust and the discomfort of the march, she went with him then too, when other queens would have stayed behind in the cool of the palace, and she bore the hardship at his side without complaint, so that he was never long parted from her, not for a season, not for a month, scarcely for a day. She was, the chroniclers tell us, not only the love of his heart, but the trusted keeper of his mind. He shared his counsels with her. He kept his own royal seal in her hands, the very seal that made a command law, so that no order of his was truly final until it had passed through her keeping. When he was troubled, she calmed him. When he was hard, she softened him. She was famed for her gentleness toward the poor and the wretched, forever pleading the cause of some fallen family or some condemned man, forever asking mercy, so that her name became, among the people, a name for kindness. And year by year she gave him children, a long line of sons and daughters, and their household. For all its wealth and its high estate was by every account a warm and loving one, close-knit and tender, the sort of family whose happiness is quiet and daily and deep. So let us rest here a while, in the good years, before any shadow comes, because the good years were long, and they were golden, and they deserve to be dwelt in slowly. Picture the two of them in the cool of a winter evening in one of the grand garden palaces, on a marble terrace above a long pool of still water. The fountains playing softly, the sky going from gold to rose to violet behind the dark shapes of the cypress trees. Lamps kindled, one after another, down the terrace and in the branches, and mirrored in the black glass of the water below. The children somewhere near, their voices soft and happy in the falling dusk. Music, perhaps, from an inner room, a single-stringed instrument and a low sweet voice, the scent of night flowers opening. And the two of them together, easy in each other's company after so many years, needing to say very little, watching the light go out of the sky and the lamps come up on the water, at peace at the very centre of the richest and most beautiful court in the world. That was their happiness, and it was real, and it lasted a long time, and we will let it last a long time here too. Breathe slowly. There is no hurry. The lamps are being lit one by one along the terrace and doubled in the still black water, and there is nowhere in all the earth that either of them would rather be. Let us dwell a little on that household in the good years, on the warm, ordinary heart of it, for beneath all the splendour of that wealthiest of courts it was, at bottom, a family, and a close and a loving one, and few things rest a soul so well on a still night than the warmth of a loving house. They were blessed, these two, with a long succession of children over the years of their marriage, sons and daughters, born one after another through the near 2 decades they had together, and the children grew up close about them, in the palaces and the garden cities, moving with the court as it moved. So that the whole family travelled together, more often than not a warm knot of shared life at the living centre of the empire. The princes were taught as their father had been by the finest scholars, taught their letters and their histories, and their poetry, and their riding, and the princesses too were taught. For this was a house that prized learning in its women as well as its men. And more than one of the emperor's daughters grew into a woman of deep reading and fine judgment. A writer of verses, a keeper of the family's heart. One daughter above all, the eldest, would come in time to stand very close to her father, to be his comfort and his companion in his later years, to tend him faithfully to the very end of his life. And it is good to know, going into the sorrow that waits ahead, that the old man would not in the end be left alone, that a child of that loving house would sit with him through the long evening of his days. And of the queen herself, the beloved Mumtaz Mahal, we are told again and again that she was the warm centre of that warmth, gentle beyond the common run, tender toward her children, and tender, too, toward the countless strangers she never met, but whose lives she quietly bettered. For she had the ear of the most powerful man on the earth, and she used it, over and over, not for herself, but for mercy, when some family had fallen into ruin, when some poor soul had been condemned, when some petition for kindness reached the court. It was so often she who took it up, who spoke softly to the emperor on their behalf, who asked that the hard judgment be softened, that the fallen be lifted up, that the hungry be fed. So that her name spread among the ordinary people of the empire as a name to bless, a name that meant that somewhere near the cold machinery of power there was a warm and a merciful heart. It is said the emperor could refuse her almost nothing, and that she asked, almost always, only for gentleness toward others. That was the woman he loved, not only the great beauty of the old poems, though she was that, but a soul so kind that a whole empire came to speak her name with tenderness. And knowing that, we understand a little better why, when he lost her, the light truly did go out of the golden court, and why he could not rest until he had raised for her a monument as pure and as gentle as she had been. So picture them, one last time, in the ripeness of the good years. Before any shadow, the whole warm family gathered upon a marble terrace in the coolness of a winter evening. The children's voices soft in the falling dusk, the emperor and his queen side by side above the still water, the lamps kindled one after another along the terrace and mirrored in the dark pool below, the fountains playing, the scent of the night flowers rising, the music drifting soft from an inner room, a loving house at peace at the middle of a golden world, with everything it could wish for, and the one gift that matters most of all held safe within it. Let that warmth settle over you now, deep and soft, and rest in it a while, for it was real, and it lasted long, and nothing can take it from the story now. Now, in those long good years, while the prince and his beloved were raising their close and happy family, the great slow business of the empire went on all around them, and the prince grew from a promising youth into the most capable man of his generation, the one on whom, more and more, the weight of the whole realm came to rest. His father, the Emperor Jahangir, was a man of many gifts and many weaknesses, a lover of painting and gardens and wine, more inclined to enjoy the empire than to labour over it. And as the years passed and the old emperor tired, it was the grave and able son who did much of the hard work of ruling, who rode out to settle the troubled provinces, who led the armies of the empire into the hot hilly country of the south, and brought the proud kingdoms there to terms. We will not linger over the wars, for this is a story told for peace, and there is little comfort in the clash of armies on the edge of sleep. Let it be enough to say that he proved himself, again and again, a soldier and a governor of the first rank, patient and thorough and cool-headed, so that by the time he was still a young man, there was no real doubt in anyone's mind that he, of all the sons, was the one fit to wear the crown. And there were hard years too. In that time, years of struggle and uncertainty. For the succession to the Mughal throne was never a simple or a gentle thing, and a prince who would be emperor had to hold his place against his own brothers and against the shifting favour of the court. There were seasons when the prince was out of favour, seasons when he had to keep to the far provinces and wait, seasons of anxiety and reversal. Through all of them, Mumtaz Mahal was at his side, sharing the long, uneasy marches and the makeshift camps and the waiting, so that even the hard years bound them the closer rather than driving them apart. And in the end, when his father, the old emperor, at last laid down the burden of his life, it was he, the grave and able son, who gathered the reins of the empire into his hands, and in the year we would call 1628 he came at last to the throne of his fathers and was crowned emperor of all the Mughal lands, and upon that day he set aside the name of his childhood, the Joyous One, and took to himself the great title by which the world has known him ever since. He became Shah Jahan, which means, in the old Persian tongue, the king of the world. And for a time in those years it must have seemed a fair enough name, for the empire he had come to rule was as near to a kingdom of the world as anything then upon the earth. Let us walk slowly through its splendour now, through the golden heart of it. For this is the comfort at the still centre of our story, the warm still centre we will keep coming back to, and no drama enters it, only wonder, only the slow, soft cataloguing of beautiful things, which is among the surest roads down into sleep. Close your eyes, if they are not already closed, and let me show you the court of the lord of that empire, at the very height of its glory. Picture, first, the great hall of audience, where the emperor showed himself to his people. It was a wide-open hall of pillars, cool and shaded, open on one side to a great courtyard. And at the back of it, raised up on a marble platform beneath a canopy, stood the seat of the emperor. And that seat was no plain chair. It was a wonder in itself, one of the most fabled objects ever wrought by human hands, a thing so rich that the mind can scarcely hold it. They called it the Peacock Throne. It was made, they tell us, of solid gold, worked and beaten and shaped over long years by the finest goldsmiths of the empire. And it was raised up on golden legs, and above it spread a golden canopy held up on golden pillars, and over the canopy stood the shapes of two peacocks, with their tails outspread, fashioned all of gold and then sewn over, feather upon feather, with sapphires and rubies and emeralds and pearls, so that the tails of the golden birds shimmered with every colour of the jewel box at once. Between the peacocks stood the figure of a tree, its trunk of gold. Its leaves of green enamel hung all over with fruits of ruby and diamond and pearl, and the whole throne, from its feet to its canopy, blazed with gemstones set into the gold, great table-cut diamonds and rubies the size of eggs and emeralds green as deep water, and long ropes of matched pearls hanging down. So that when the emperor sat there in the shaded hall, and a shaft of the afternoon sun came in and struck the throne, it flashed and burned and threw coloured light onto the marble like something not of the earth at all. It had taken years to make, and the wealth of a province to fill, and there was nothing else like it anywhere on earth, and the treasuries that lay behind that hall were fuller still. The Mughal emperors had gathered over the long generations one of the great hoards of the age, and Shah Jahan added to it, and loved it, and knew it, stone by stone. For he was, remember, a man who prized beautiful things and understood them as few men ever have. There were rooms, we are told, of gold and silver, coin and plate and ingot, weighed out and stacked and sealed. There were rooms of jewels, the loose treasure of an empire, kept in bags and boxes and trays, diamonds from the deep mines of the south. The only place in that age where diamonds were found at all, some of them among the largest and most famous stones the world has ever seen. Rubies and spinels carried down from the mountains of the north, deep red and glowing, emeralds green as wet grass, sapphires of a blue like the evening sky, and pearls, endless pearls, fished up from the warm gulf to the west, ropes and ropes of them, cream and rose and grey. For these Muggles loved pearls above almost every other gem and wore them by the double handful. There were jade cups carved thin as an eggshell, so fine you could see the light through them. Cool green and white jade brought all the long journey from the Far East and worked by the Emperor's own carvers into bowls and wine cups and the hilts of daggers. And Shah Jahan loved jade especially, that cool, smooth stone, and had it carved for him more finely than any ruler before or since. Rest a while in those cool treasure rooms, in the soft dark, among the quiet weight of all that gathered beauty. There is no need to want any of it. It is enough, tonight, simply to know that it was there, and to let the long, slow list of it, gold and pearl and emerald and jade, carry you softly down. But the true wealth of that court, the thing that Shah Jahan loved and nurtured most of all, was not the dead treasure in the vaults, but the living skill of its makers. The great workshops of the empire, where the most gifted craftsmen of half a continent bent all day over the slow perfecting of beautiful things. For the Mughal court did not only buy beauty, it made it in its own halls on a scale and to a fineness the world had rarely seen. There were the workshops of the painters where miniature pictures were made no larger than a spread hand, and yet so fine that a single one might hold a whole garden full of flowers, each petal separate, each leaf its own green. And the faces of 100 courtiers, each its own true likeness, all of it laid on with brushes made of a few hairs and colours ground from crushed gems and rare earths and beaten gold, and among them the ateliers of the calligraphers, where the flowing script of that court was raised to the very peak of an art, whole pages of poetry and holy verse written out in a hand so balanced and so graceful that the shape of the words upon the page was as beautiful as their meaning. For among these people the writing of a fine hand was reckoned among the noblest of all the arts, and the greatest masters of it were honoured like princes. There were the workshops of the goldsmiths and the jewellers, of the weavers who made the silks and the fabled soft wool shawls, of the carvers of jade and ivory and stone. And there was one craft above all that Shah Jahan loved and raised to a perfection never seen before or since, and it is the craft we must understand, gently, before the end of our story, because it is the craft that would cover the walls of the wonder he built. They called it, in the tongue of the court, the inlaid work, the stone flower work, the setting of precious coloured stones into white marble to make flowers and vines and scrolls that would never fade and never wilt. Picture how it was done, slowly, for the slowness of it is the whole point. A sheet of pure white marble, ground and polished smooth as milk. Upon it, the drawn shape of a single flower, a poppy or a lily or a spray of tulips, gentle and true. Then, with small chisels, following the drawn line, the craftsman would cut away the marble in the exact shape of a single petal, a shallow hollow no deeper than a fingernail, its edges clean and sharp. And then he would take a sliver of coloured stone, a piece of carnelian orange-red as a low coal, or of green jade, or of deep blue lapis flecked with gold, or of yellow amber or grey agate, or the dark red of the bloodstone, and he would grind that sliver, patiently, over hours, over days, until it fitted the little hollow in the marble so perfectly that no gap of any kind remained, and he would set it in with a fine cement so that its polished face lay exactly flush with the polished face of the marble all around it. And you could run your hand across the whole flower and feel nothing at all, no ridge, no seam, only one smooth, cool surface. The marble and the stone become, to the touch, a single thing, and a single flower might be made of many such slivers, 20 or 30 or 50 pieces of coloured stone, each one shaded a little differently, so that the petal seemed to blush from deep red at its base to pale pink at its tip, exactly as a living petal does. And the flower seemed, in the shifting daylight, almost to breathe. One such flower might take a skilled man weeks to make, and Shah Jahan would in time cover whole walls with them, gardens of them, thousands upon thousands of them, blooming forever in the white marble, and never fading, and never falling, long after every living flower of that country had bloomed and died 1,000 times over. Hold that, softly, as the workshops fall quiet for the night. Flowers made of coloured stone, set into white marble so smoothly that they feel like a single skin, blooming forever and never falling. We will come back to them. And around all this wealth and all this making, the emperor laid out, as his fathers had before him, gardens and gardens and gardens. For he was the great-great-grandson of Babur, who could not live without them, and the love of the cool green ordered garden ran in him as strong as it had run in any of his line. The Mughal garden was a thing built to a plan as old as paradise itself, and once you know the plan you can see it in your mind's eye and rest inside it. Picture a great square of green, walled around, and running through it, crossing at the very centre, 2 long straight channels of water, dividing the whole garden into 4 equal parts. The 4 rivers of the old dream of paradise. Down the channels the water runs, slow and bright, sometimes falling over small carved ledges so that it murmurs, sometimes spreading into square still pools where sky and trees lie doubled. Along the channels march straight avenues of tall, dark cypress trees, pointing at the sky, and between them the softer, rounder shapes of the fruit trees, the orange and the lemon and the pomegranate and the mango, and beneath them beds of flowers laid out in patterns, roses and lilies and narcissus and the red of the poppy and the yellow of the marigold. Fountains play, cooling the air, filling it with the sound of falling water. Pavilions of white marble stand at the crossing of the channels and along the walls, open on every side to catch the breeze, floored with cool stone, spread with soft carpets, where a man might sit through the day's heat in the deep green shade and watch the water run and hear the fountains and smell the flowers and be, for an hour, entirely at peace. This was the garden the Mughals made, over and over, in every city of their empire, and Shah Jahan made the most beautiful of them all. Rest there a while, the channels of water crossing at the centre, the dark spires of the cypress, the soft round fruit trees, the falling of the fountains, the deep green shade of the pavilion, and the whole warm afternoon with nothing in it that you have to do. And these gardens and these workshops and these treasuries were gathered into great cities, for the empire was rich in cities. And the emperor moved between them with his whole court. A slow and glittering migration, as the seasons and the business of the realm required. There was the old capital at Agra, on the wide brown Yamuna, a city walled in rose-red sandstone, its great fort rising sheer above the river, crowded within with palaces and halls and gardens and the tombs of the emperor's forefathers. There was Lahore to the north, where he had been born, another city of gardens and forts and shaded courts. And in time, in the fullness of his reign, Shah Jahan would build himself an entirely new capital, a whole new city raised from bare ground up the country at Delhi. A city of broad straight streets and a great walled fort of red stone above the river, with halls of white stone inside it so fine that over the arch of the grandest of them the emperor had a line of verse worked in gold. A verse that said, in the old tongue, that if there were a paradise anywhere upon the face of the earth, then it was here. It was here. It was here. And who is to say the man was wrong to think it? He had come into the richest and most beautiful court in the world, and he had made it richer and more beautiful still. And at the core of it all he had the one possession no gold could buy, and that gives the rest its meaning. He had the woman he loved, close beside him, year upon year, keeping his seal in her gentle hands, calming him, softening him, bearing his children, walking with him in the cool hush of the evening down the long green avenues between the running water and the dark cypress trees. For a time, for a good long time, the master of that court had everything, and he knew it, and he was, in the deepest sense, content, breathe slowly, and rest there beside him, in the garden, in the golden evening, with the water running and the fountains falling, and everything he loves close about him and safe. Nothing is lost yet. The lamps are only just being lit. Let us stay a little longer in those good years, in the golden middle of it all, and simply dwell within the daily round of that court, the slow, soft turning of its ordinary days, for there is deep comfort in the small, settled rhythms of a happy household, however grand, and it is a soothing thing to rest inside them as you drift. The days of the court began always before the light, in the cool grey hush of the early morning, for it was an old custom of that house that the emperor should show himself to his people at the very break of the day. He would come out onto a high balcony of white marble that looked out over the wide river and the country beyond, and there in the first pale light the people gathered below could see him, and know that all was well and go about their day. It was a gentle and a steadying thing, that daily showing at the dawn, as steadying in its way as the rising of the sun itself. And the whole slow ceremony of the court was built of such things, of daily and settled acts done in their proper order, so that the days had a shape a soul could lean on. There was the morning audience, and the ordering of the realm's affairs, the reading of the reports that came in from the far provinces, the hearing of petitions, the slow patient work of governing a country so vast that a message might take weeks to cross it. And then, as the day's heat came on, the retreat into the cool inner courts, into the deep shade and the moving air, where screens of wet, sweet-smelling grass were hung in the doorways and fanned, so that the breath of the room came in cool and fragrant even in the white heat of the noon. And through all of it, woven into the ordinary hours, ran the arts that the court loved above almost everything, for these were not a rough or a warlike people only, but a people who prized beauty and learning and grace as the true ornaments of a great life. There was music, always music, soft and endless, the long slow ragas of that country, each one belonging to its own hour of the day or its own season of the year, so that there were melodies made to be played only at the dawn, and others only in the deep of the night, and others only in the season of the rains. The whole turning of the day and the year mirrored in the wheeling of the music, a single stringed instrument, plucked slow and sweet, and a low voice rising and falling over it, and the soft beat of a drum beneath, and the notes hanging in the warm night air and fading, slowly, into the sound of the fountains. And there was poetry, for this was a court that loved poets, and honoured them, and gathered the finest of them from across the whole eastern world, and on many an evening the great ones would come and recite the long sweet verses of love and longing, and the turning of the world in the flowing Persian tongue. And the court would sit in the lamplight and listen, and a fine couplet, perfectly turned, was prized as highly as a fine jewel. And there were the astronomers, the watchers of the heavens, for the Mughals loved the stars and kept careful track of their slow wheeling, and on the flat marble roofs, in the cool quiet of the night, the wise men would set up their instruments of brass and study the sky, mapping the courses of the planets, reckoning the calendar, reading, or believing they read, the long slow story written in the lights above. It is a peaceful picture to hold. The astronomers on the marble roof in the cool still of the night, bending over their brass instruments beneath the same great wheel of stars that turns, tonight, over your own quiet roof, 400 years on. And the year itself turned through a long round of festivals, so that the settled days were lit, again and again, with brightness. There was the great festival market we walked through once already, where the ladies of the court kept their stalls of silks and jewels and sweetmeats in the lamplit garden. There was the festival where the emperor was weighed on a great pair of golden scales against his own weight in gold and silver and silk and grain and spices, all of it then given away to the poor, so that the wealth of the court flowed out, once a year, in blessing to the people. There were the festivals of the changing seasons, the welcoming of the spring with coloured powders and music, the lighting of countless small lamps in the season of lights, so that the entire city glittered in the dark like the sky brought down to earth. And there were the great slow processions, when the emperor moved through his city or from one city to another, and the whole glittering weight of the court moved with him. The elephants, first of all. The huge patient grey elephants painted and hung with cloth of gold and silver bells, bearing the emperor and his great ones in canopied seats high above the crowds, and behind them the horses and the guards and the banners and the long, long train of the household, moving slowly through the streets between the gathered people, a river of gold and colour and slow music flowing through the rose-red city. Rest a while within that slow procession, in the warm evening light, the great painted elephants swaying by with their soft bells ringing, the banners lifting in the breeze, the whole shining court moving past, unhurried, magnificent, at peace. And beneath all the splendour lay the good plain comforts that even the sovereign of the age shares with every soul that has ever lived, the pleasure of cool water when the day is hot, of shade at noon, of a warm room in the chill of the winter night, the pleasure of good food, and this was a court that loved its food. The long, slow, cooked dishes rich with saffron and cardamom and cinnamon, the rice cooked with almonds and raisins and threads of gold, the sweet fruits of that generous country, the mango and the melon and the pomegranate, kept cool in the hot season, with ice and snow brought down at great cost from the far northern mountains and carried, wrapped and hurried, across the plains, so that even in the white heat of the summer the emperor might have a cool sherbet, sweet and fragrant, in the shade of his marble pavilion, the pleasure of the garden in the evening, the pleasure of children's voices in the next court, the pleasure of the one you love, close beside you, in the cool shade of the night. For all its gold, and all its jewels, and all its vast dominion, the deepest happiness of that court was made of the same small warm things that any happiness is made of anywhere. And the man at its heart had them all, in those good years, in full measure, and knew that he had them, and was content. Breathe slowly, and be content there with him, in the golden middle of the good years, with the music playing soft in the inner room, and the fountains falling in the garden, and the whole warm settled world turning gently around you, and nothing yet to trouble the peace of it at all. And now, dear listener, our story comes to its one great sorrow, and I will tell it to you softly and gently, and briefly, as one tells a hard thing to someone who is nearly asleep, because there is no comfort in dwelling on grief, and this is above all a story that turns its grief into beauty. So let us pass through the shadow lightly, and come out the other side into the light again, where the rest of the story waits. In the early years of his reign, only a few years after he had come to the throne, the emperor rode south once more, as emperors must, on the long slow business of the realm, down into the hot country to settle the affairs of the southern provinces. And as always, in all the long years of their marriage, his beloved queen went with him. She was expecting another child, for they had been blessed with many. A long line of sons and daughters over near enough 20 years together, and she had borne them all bravely and gone on at his side. They made their camp in a city of the south on a river in the great imperial tents. And there, far from the cool gardens of the north, in the heat of the country, the child was born. But the birth was a hard one, harder than any before, and though the child lived, the mother did not rise again from it. She lingered a short while, and the emperor was called to her, and he sat with her through the last of it. And then, very quietly, in the deep of a summer night, in the camp on the river far from home, the light of his whole life went out. She was not yet 40 years old. They had been married for near enough 2 decades, and had almost never been apart, and now, in a single night, in a tent in a strange hot city, she was gone. There is a phrase the old chroniclers use, and I will give it to you and no more, because it holds the whole of it, and needs nothing added. They wrote that the light went out of the golden court. That is all. The ruler of the whole earth, who had everything, who had gold and empire and the finest treasures on the earth, had lost the one thing that gave the rest its meaning. and no treasure in any of his vaults could buy back a single hour of what he had lost. They tell us he shut himself away for a long time and would see no one, that when at last he came out again his hair had turned grey, that the man who came out was quieter and graver and older than the man who had gone in, as though some of the fire of his life had gone into the dark with her. We will not follow him into that room. We will let him grieve unwatched, as grief should be, and we will simply wait, in the quiet, for him to come out again. And when he comes out, when the first hard tide of it has passed, he does a thing that no grieving man had ever quite done before. A thing that turns the whole story, from that night on, back toward the light. He decides that he will build for her a tomb, a resting place, a monument, and that it will not be an ordinary tomb, however grand. He decides that he will raise for her the loveliest building that has ever risen upon the earth, or that ever will, a thing so perfect and so pure that it will say without a single word everything that he can no longer say to her, and that it will go on saying it, in white marble, for as long as the world endures. His grief, being the grief of a man who all his life had loved to make beautiful things, turns itself into the greatest act of making the world has known. And that, dear listener, is where the shadow ends, and where the light comes back, and where the wonder of our story truly begins to rise. So let us leave the sorrow behind us now, folded away and at rest. And let us go, in the cool dark of a bright morning, to the place he chose, and stand there with him, and watch the vision take shape. He chose a place at Agra, the old rose-red capital on the wide brown Yamuna, on the bank of the river itself, on a broad piece of ground where the river makes a long, slow bend, so that the water runs past the site on one whole side of it. It was a careful and a beautiful choice, and there was deep thought in it, for a reason we will come to understand only at the very end. Picture the place as it was on the morning the work began, a broad flat stretch of ground above the river, cleared and levelled. The wide brown water sliding past below, the far bank green and quiet, the great fort of red sandstone standing off along the river to one side, and above it all the huge pale sky of the northern morning. Here, the emperor decreed, on this ground, above this water, the wonder would rise, and around him, in those first days, gathered the men who would raise it, the master builders and the master craftsmen of the whole empire and beyond, summoned from every corner of the Mughal world and from the lands beyond its borders. The finest architects, the greatest calligraphers, the most gifted of the stone flower workers, the masters of the dome, the arch, and the garden, all of them called to Agra to give the best of their lives' skill to this one work. We do not know for certain the name of the single man who drew the master plan, for it was the custom of that age that a great building was the work of many hands and many minds gathered under the will of the emperor. And the emperor himself, remember, was a man who understood building as few rulers ever have, who had loved it since he was a boy, watching the craftsmen at their benches, and who, we are told, watched over every stage of this work with the closest and most loving care. But tradition has handed down to us the name of the chief of the master builders, a man of great learning, deeply versed in the mathematics and the geometry on which so perfect a building must stand, and around him a whole company of masters, each supreme in his own art. And together, over long months, bending over their drawings and their models by lamplight, they shaped the vision, a great tomb of pure white marble, raised on a wide platform above the river, crowned by a swelling dome, guarded at its four corners by four slender towers, set at the head of a vast walled garden laid out to the old plan of paradise, with a long still channel of water running down the centre of it, until the whole white building would stand twinned in the water, once carved in stone against the pale sky, and once afloat in the trembling glass of the pool. Every part of it was measured and weighed against every other part, for these masters knew, as the great builders of every age have known, that true beauty in a building is a matter of proportion, of the exact and secret rightness of one measurement against another. so that the eye, resting on it, feels a deep and wordless satisfaction without ever quite knowing why. And they laboured over those proportions until they were, so far as the mind of man can make a thing, perfect. And then the great work of gathering the materials began, and this is one of the good slow wonders of the story. The long patient hauling in of the beautiful stuff of the earth from half a continent away. And it is good to rest inside as you drift. This picture of a whole empire bending itself, for love, toward one white building on a riverbank. The marble, first, the pure white marble that is the whole body and glory of the place, was not to be had at Agra, but far away to the west and the south, in the dry hills of the desert country, where lay the finest white marble in all of India. A marble so pure and so close-grained that it takes a polish like still water and glows, in certain lights, as though it held a soft lamp within itself. And from those far quarries the marble had to be brought, block by great block, across the long dry miles to the river at Agra. Picture the carts that carried it, huge heavy carts with wheels as tall as a man, and the teams that drew them, not 2 or 4 beasts but whole strings of oxen, and, for the greatest blocks, the elephants, the patient grey elephants of the empire, leaning into their harness, hauling the enormous pale stones foot by foot along the dusty roads, day after day, week after week, under the wide hot sky. A slow river of white marble flowing across the country toward the one place where it would rise. And when the blocks reached the river, they were floated the final stretch, we are told, on barges, down the slow brown water to the site, so that the marble came to its resting place at last by the same river along whose bank it would stand forever. Rest a while in that slow procession. The tall wheeled carts, the straining oxen, the patient elephants leaning into the harness, the great pale blocks moving foot by foot across the dry gold country, and then floating the last quiet mile down the brown river. All of it moving slowly, slowly, toward the one white building on the river's long bend. And all of it moving for love. And marble was not all. From every direction the beautiful materials of the earth came flowing in toward Agra, gathered by the wealth and the reach of the richest realm in the world. The green jade and the clear crystal came from the far mountains of the east and the north. The blue lapis, deep as a midnight sky and flecked with points of gold, came from the high cold mines of the far northwest, where it had been dug for thousands of years. The carnelian, orange-red as a low coal, came from the west. The turquoise came down from the country of the mountains, and the deep red bloodstone, and the yellow amber, and the banded agate, and the mother of pearl with its soft shifting rainbow, and a whole quiet treasury of coloured stones besides, dozens of different kinds, each chosen for the exact hue it would lend to one petal of one stone flower on one wall of the wonder, and with the materials came the men to work them. Until the bare riverbank had become a whole city of labour, tens of thousands of workers gathered in one place, the masons and the marble cutters and the polishers, the stone flower workers with their small chisels and their slivers of coloured stone, the calligraphers, the garden makers, the diggers and the haulers and the raisers, and around them the whole ordinary town that such a gathering brings into being, the markets and the cooks and the water carriers and the tent makers. A great humming city of making that would stand on that riverbank for the greater part of 20 years, all of it turned, every day, toward the slow rising of one perfect white building above the brown, unhurried water, and over it all, coming often to watch, walking the rising scaffolds, studying the drawings, murmuring with the masters, the grey-haired emperor pouring into this one work all the love he could no longer give to the woman it was raised for. Breathe slowly now, and let that whole warm humming city settle into the dusk. The stone has come from half a world away. The masters are gathered. The ground is cleared above the river. Tomorrow the wonder begins to rise. There is no haste at all. We have 20 quiet years, and all of them are ours. Now let us watch it rise, slowly, over the long years, as you would watch a flower open if you had the patience of the stone itself. They began, as all great buildings must begin, not with beauty, but with strength, deep down and out of sight. For a thing that is to stand for 1,000 years beside a great river must be founded on rock-firm ground that the river can never undermine. So the first long labour, before ever a white stone was laid, was the making of the ground itself, the digging out and the filling in, and the raising up of a vast firm base along the river bank, packed and rammed and made solid, so that all the enormous weight of marble to come would rest, in the end, on a foundation as steady as the earth. And upon that made ground they raised, first, a great wide platform, a broad square terrace of stone lifted well above the level of the river, faced all in the same pure marble, so that the wonder, when it came, would stand not upon the common ground, but upon a bright raised stage of its own, above the water, against the sky. Rest a moment on the making of that platform, on the patient months of it, the hauling and the setting and the levelling, until at last there lay along the river a great smooth square of white marble, empty and waiting, catching the light, doubled already in the brown water below. And at its four corners they began to raise the 4 towers. The 4 towers, the slender towers that the world knows so well, were built one at each corner of the great platform, standing a little apart from the tomb itself, and they were made tall and slim and graceful, tapering as they rose, each one crowned at its top with a small open marble pavilion, a little domed canopy on slender pillars, open to the wind on every side, and there was a deep quiet cleverness in them, beyond their beauty, for the masters built them leaning, ever so slightly, outward, away from the tomb at their centre, a lean so gentle that no eye could ever catch it, and they built them so for a reason of great tenderness and foresight, that if ever, in some far century, in some earth-shaking or some great storm, one of the towers should fall, it would fall outward, away from the precious tomb, and not inward upon it. Even in the raising of the towers, you see, there was love, and there was the long patient thinking ahead of men who meant this thing to stand and be safe, not for their own lifetimes only, but for all the lifetimes that would ever come after. The 4 slender towers then, standing at the 4 corners of the bright platform, leaning out so gently that no one would ever know, each crowned with its small open pavilion where the wind moved through, and between them, at the centre, rising now, the tomb itself. The tomb was raised as a great square building of white marble, but a square with its corners cut away and softened, so that it had many faces rather than 4 hard sides, and into each face was set a great tall archway. A deep pointed arch recessed into the wall, so that this whole building, for all its size, seemed not heavy but light, not a solid block, but a thing of arches and recesses and shadow and shade, as though it might almost lift. Up and up the white walls rose, course upon course of the pure pale marble, each block set so close to its neighbour that the joints between them all but vanished and the whole seemed cut from a single mountain of white stone. And then, above the walls, swelling up against the sky, rose the great crown of the whole design, the dome. The dome of the wonder is one of the most beautiful shapes that human hands have ever raised. A great swelling curve, broad and full and rounded, gathered at its top to a point and crowned with a slender golden finial that lifts, at the very last, into the sky. It does not sit heavily upon the building. It seems rather to float above it, to swell up out of it like something rising. And around its base stand 4 smaller domed pavilions, the same little open canopies as crown the towers, so that the great dome is attended by 4 small ones, like a mother among her children. And the whole, dome and pavilions and walls and arches and towers, all of it the one pure white marble, so that on a bright day the whole marvel stands against the blue sky as a single dazzling white shape, and on a grey day it glows soft as a pearl, and at dawn and at dusk it takes the colour of the sky itself, rose and gold and violet, and at night, under the moon, it glimmers pale as milk, pale as a ghost, pale as a dream you are half remembering. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, toward the finished thing. Come back to the years of the making, and to the slow adorning of the white walls. For the marble was only the beginning of the beauty. For the whole of that vast white surface, inside and out, was not left plain, but was worked over years and years with an adornment so fine and so patient that it beggars belief. There was carving, first low carving raised in the marble itself, whole borders and panels of flowers, tulips and lilies and poppies and irises, carved in shallow relief along the base of the walls and around the arches, so that the very stones seemed to have put out a garden of pale flowers, all of them the same white as the wall, catching the light only in the softest shadow of their own edges. And then, over and among the carving came the coloured work, the stone flower work. The inlay we watched being made in the workshops long ago, and now we see what it was all for. Up the great arches, along the borders, in panels and scrolls and sprays across the white marble. The craftsmen set their thousands upon thousands of flowers made of coloured stone, each petal its own sliver of carnelian, or jade, or lapis or amber. Each flower shaded from deep to pale exactly as a living flower is shaded. Whole climbing vines of them, whole borders of them, so smoothly set into the marble that the hand passing over them feels nothing but one cool surface, and the eye, in the changing light of the day, sees them seem almost to stir and breathe. Gardens that would never fade, flowers that would never fall. A springtime fixed forever in the white stone, blooming on, quietly, in the sun and the moonlight, long after the man who ordered it and the men who made it were all of them gone down into the dark. Rest a while among those stone flowers. Run your hand, in your mind, across the cool, smooth marble and feel how the coloured petals lie perfectly flush with the white. How there is no seam, no ridge, nothing but the one still surface. And the flowers blooming in it forever. And there was one more adornment, the noblest of all in the reckoning of that court. And it too we saw being practised long ago in the workshops, and now we see it come to its glory. Around the great arches, framing the deep doorways, ran bands of the flowing script of the court, verses of the Holy Book set into the white marble in letters of black stone, whole passages of it, chosen with great care to speak of mercy and of paradise and of the soul's return, at last, to peace. And here the masters wrought a quiet miracle of the eye that few who stand before the wonder ever notice, and yet that soothes them all the same, knowing that the letters near the top of the great arch would be far above the head of anyone standing below, and would seem, by the trick of distance, smaller and thinner than the letters near the bottom. They made those upper letters larger and thicker and set them a little further apart, so cunningly graded up the whole height that to the eye of a person standing below, gazing up, every line of the writing seems exactly the same size as every other, from the bottom of the arch to the very top. The whole soaring band of holy verse seems calm and even and effortless, and no one ever knows the long patient calculation that made it so. That was the manner of those masters, in everything, to labour without end over a perfection that would look, in the finished thing, as though it had cost no labour at all, as though it had simply grown there, as easy and as right as a flower, and over the great gateway to the whole garden, in that same flowing script. They set a verse that speaks softly to the soul, bidding the soul that is at peace to return home to its Lord, well pleased and pleasing, and to enter in among the blessed, and to enter the garden of paradise. Enter thou my paradise. That was the word written over the gate, and when you understand what the whole place was, and why it was made, and what garden it was that stood beyond that gate, the gentleness of those words is almost more than the heart can hold. For the tomb did not stand alone, it stood before a great garden, and the garden was as much a part of the wonder as the white building itself. And it was laid out to that old plan of paradise we walked through together long ago, picture it now, complete, a vast walled square of green before the tomb. And running down the very centre of it, straight as a drawn line from the great gateway to the foot of the marble platform. A long, long channel of still water, edged in marble, with a row of fountains down its length. And crossing it at the middle, another such channel, so that all the garden is divided into its 4 green quarters, the 4 gardens of the 4 rivers of paradise. Down the quarters march the dark, straight avenues of the cypress trees, the tree of morning and of eternity, and among them stand the softer fruit trees, and beds of flowers, roses and narcissus and all the rest, so that the air of the garden is sweet and cool and full of the sound of falling water and of birds. And above it all, beyond the long still channel, lifted on its bright platform above the river, stands the white wonder, its dome and 4 towers dazzling against the sky. And here is the last and the loveliest thing of all, the thing the whole design was bent toward, that long central channel of still water running straight toward the tomb was made to be a mirror. On a still morning, when no wind stirs it, the water lies as smooth and dark as polished glass. And in it, upside down and perfect and trembling only very faintly, stands the whole white wonder a second time, dome and towers alike mirrored in the water, so that whoever walks down the long path toward it sees 2 of them, one lifting into the sky and one sinking into the still bright water, the marble and its own reflection, the real and the dreamed, meeting at the water's edge. That was the vision, and after 20 patient years. The vision stood complete, above the slow brown river before the green garden, doubled in the still dark water, the most beautiful building that has ever stood upon the earth. Breathe slowly, and let it stand there, complete and shining and still, doubled in the water, while you drift a little deeper. It is finished now. It is finished. And it is more beautiful than anyone had dared to dream. Let us stay a while now with the finished wonder, and simply watch the light move over it through a single day. For there is no gentler thing in all this story than the slow turning of the light on that white marble, and it will carry you down as surely as the tide carries a small boat out into the calm. Come then into the grey stillness that goes before sunrise, when the garden lies wet and hushed, and not a soul walks the long paths, and the birds have not yet woken, and the river below slips by dark and quiet. The great dome stands pale grey against a paler grey sky, scarcely to be told apart from the air around it. A ghost of a building, waiting, and then, so gently, away off eastward, beyond the water and the flat green fields. The first faint filament of light comes climbing up, the barest warming of the grey toward rose, and the crown of the dome takes it before all else. The golden spire at its summit, a lone spark kindling in the dark. Then the glow spreads downward, down across the swell of the dome. And then the pale marble begins to warm, passing from ash to ivory to the tenderest flush of pink, gathering the rose of daybreak and holding to it, so that for a small while, in that early half-light, the whole building shines the colour of the inside of a shell, warm and living and soft, mirrored in the quiet dark pool beneath, where a second rose-tinted dome hangs upside down in the water's glass. That was the hour the emperor is thought to have cherished above all others, and it is the single picture we chose together when this long night began. A lamp upon the water, the pale dome taking the earliest rose of morning above the quiet stream. Hold it now, softly, for it has come true. Then the sun lifts clear of the horizon, and the rose light passes, and the marble whitens, and by the middle of the morning the whole wonder stands dazzling and pure and brilliant white against the deep blue of the northern sky, so bright in the high sun that the eye can hardly rest on it, every carved flower and every band of writing thrown into crisp shadow, the 4 towers standing sharp and slim at their corners, the great dome swelling up full and perfect, the whole doubled and blazing, in the bright water of the long channel, and through the heat of the middle of the day the marble holds the light and gives a little of it back, glowing softly even in the shade, cool to the touch for all the sun upon it. The deep archways full of blue shadow, the fountains playing, the cypresses standing still and dark, the whole garden drowsing in the warmth. And then, through the long golden afternoon, the light begins to lengthen and to warm again. And the marble takes the gold of it, turning slowly from white to cream to a deep honey gold, as the sun sinks toward the far bank of the river, until, at the very end of the day, the whole wonder stands bathed in the low red gold light of the evening, warm as a coal, glowing as though lit from within, and the long shadows of the cypresses stretch across the wet green grass, and the fountains catch the last of the light in their falling, and the double dome in the water burns gold as well, and the whole place is so beautiful in that last hour that those who have stood there and seen it say there are no words for it at all, and fall silent, and simply look. And then the sun goes down behind the far country, and the gold fades, and the sky goes from gold to rose to violet to the deep soft blue of the evening, and the first stars come out over the dome, and slowly the marble cools and pales and turns silver-grey in the dusk. And if there is a moon, and if the moon is full, then comes the final wonder of that day, the one that has stopped the breath of every soul lucky enough to have seen it, the great dome, under the full moon, glimmering pale and silver and unearthly, seeming almost to give off a light of its own, floating like something dreamed above the dark garden, its whiteness gathering and holding the moonlight as it had held the rose light of the dawn, and doubled once more in the black glass of the still water, so that two silver domes hang in the night, one lifting into the stars and one sinking into the dark water, and the whole world is silent, and cool, and still. That is the wonder at the end of its day. Rest there, in the moonlight, by the still water, with the silver dome floating above you, and its reflection floating below. And the fountains hushed now, and the stars coming out one by one over the sleeping garden. There is nothing here that can hurt you. There is nothing here but beauty, and stillness, and the slow cool turning of the night. The emperor, in the years after it was finished, would come to it often. We are told, crossing the river or coming up along the bank, to walk in the garden he had made, and to sit amid the cool of the marble, and to be near the one he had lost. The old chronicles of the reign, set down in the old Persian of the court, speak of his love in words that have come softly down the years. There was no hour, one of the court historians wrote of him, in which his heart was turned from her, for he had made her the treasure of his soul as she had been the treasure of his house. He is said to have vowed, early in their marriage, a thing the court long repeated. "While I live," he told her, "you shall want for nothing, and while I am remembered, you shall be remembered, and no queen shall ever have been loved as you are loved." Of the years that followed the same hand set down gently, she was to him counsellor and companion both, and he kept nothing hidden from her, and in all his cares she was his rest, and he placed the royal seal itself into her hands, so that no command was made final until it had passed her keeping. And of her kindness toward the poor they wrote, she asked of the emperor not gold nor lands, but only that the condemned be spared, and the fallen be lifted up, and the hungry be fed, and he could refuse her almost nothing. The old legend of that country, told from parent to child across the generations, holds that in her last quiet hours she turned to him and asked for one thing only. "Build for me," they say she whispered, "a resting place such as the world has never seen, so that all who look upon it may remember how we loved." And he answered her. They say, only, "It shall be as you ask, and the world shall not forget you." Whether they truly spoke such words no one can any longer say. But the promise, if promise it was kept. Of the long dark season that came after her death the histories say only this. And say it kindly, for many days he would see no one, and when at last he came forth his beard had turned to grey, and the gladness had gone from him, and he was an old man, though his years were few. The whole court, they tell us, put on the white of mourning, and the music was silenced, and the fountains stilled, and for 2 years no festival was held in all the empire, for the light had gone out of it. They tell too of a thing he said in that first year of grief, when they urged him to be comforted. "Do not ask me to forget," he answered them, "for the world may take everything from a man save the grave of the one he cherished, and that I will keep, and make so beautiful that my grief itself shall be a kind of prayer." And it must have been, for him, a strange and a deep comfort, to have turned his grief into a thing so beautiful that the whole world came to marvel at it, to know that as long as it stood, and it would stand, surely as long as anything made by human hands can stand, it would go on saying, silently, in white marble and coloured stone and flowing gold letters, the thing he could no longer say to her, that she was loved, that she was chosen above every treasure of the richest empire on the earth, that she was not forgotten, and would never, while the world lasted, be forgotten. Few of us are given any way at all to make our love outlast us. He was given the greatest way there has ever been, and he took it, and it worked. For here we are, 400 years on, at the far end of the turning world, speaking her name in the dark, because a man who loved her would not let her be forgotten. That is a warm thought to hold as you drift. Love made into something so beautiful that it outlasts every empire, and reaches, across 400 years, to you tonight in your quiet room. And it was not the only wonder he raised, for the emperor lived on for many years after the great tomb was finished. And he went on building, as he had always built, all through the long middle of his reign. And the years of his rule are remembered ever after as the golden age of the building of that whole empire, the age when its architecture came to its very peak of grace and richness, and was never afterward quite equalled again. He raised great mosques of red stone and white marble, wide and calm and full of light, with their own swelling domes and slender towers, and their own courts of still water. He built and rebuilt the palaces within the great forts, halls of white marble open to the gardens. Their walls worked with the same stone flowers, their ceilings once, it is said, worked in gold and silver and set with mirrors, so that the lamplight at night broke into 1,000 soft points like a sky full of stars. And above all, at the height of his reign, he did a thing that only the richest of emperors would dare. He built himself an entirely new capital city, up the country at Delhi, a whole great city raised from bare ground to his own design, with broad straight avenues and a canal of running water down the greatest of them, and gardens and markets, and at its heart a vast new fort of rose-red sandstone rising above the river, and within the fort halls of white marble finer than any he had built before. It was in the grandest of those halls, the hall where he sat in state before his people, that he set up at last the fabled peacock throne, that throne of gold and jewels we wandered past long ago, blazing beneath its golden canopy, and it was over the marble arch of another of those halls that he had set, in letters of gold, the line of verse that says that if there is a paradise on the face of the earth, "It is here! It is here! It is here!" He had lost the one he loved, and no city and no throne and no hall of marble could ever give her back to him. But he had turned in his grief not toward the dark, but toward the making of beautiful things, and he went on making them, patiently, all his life, so that the full face of his empire grew more beautiful for his sorrow, and the country he left behind him was fairer than the country he had been given. The chroniclers, looking back on those building years, wrote of him with a kind of wonder. He turned his grief, they said, not toward the dark, but toward the making of beautiful things, so that his sorrow itself became a gift to all who came after him. Above the arch of his grandest hall he set, in letters of gold, an old couplet that the whole world has since repeated. If there be a paradise on this earth, it reads, "It is this, it is this, it is this." And around the tomb itself another verse was set, that a pilgrim once rendered softly as, "The pure of heart shall enter here, and find the garden of the merciful, and be at peace. Rest a while among all those white halls and rose-red forts and gardens of running water, the long calm harvest of his making years, and let the quiet pride of it settle over you like a warm blanket in the coolness of the evening." He built, and what he built was beautiful, and much of it stands to this day. Let us go inside it now, slowly, before we follow the old emperor to the evening of his life. For we have stood a long while in the garden and watched the light move over the outside of the wonder, and there is a whole further beauty within it, cool and dim and hushed, that is worth the slow entering. Come first to the great gateway. The tall gate of rose-red stone and pale marble that stands at the far end of the garden and lets you in. For the makers of the wonder understood that a beautiful thing is more beautiful still if it is not shown all at once, but withheld a little and then revealed. So you come first through the high dim archway of the gate, out of the sun into its shadow, and for a moment the white wonder is hidden from you, framed only, far off, small, in the bright opening of the arch ahead. And then you step through, out of the shadow of the gate, and into the light of the garden, and there it is, all at once, whole, across the long still water. The white dome and its 4 slim towers doubled in the pool's still mirror, and the breath goes out of you, every time. For it is never quite believable, however often you have seen it, that anything so pure and so perfect should truly be standing there. And you walk toward it, slowly, up the long straight path beside the still channel of water, and it grows and grows, rising higher against the sky with every step, until at last you come to the foot of the great marble platform and must tilt your head back to take in the height of it. The walls soaring up, the dome swelling far above, the tall arches recessed into deep cool shadow, and there is a quiet wonder here that the makers built for the sake of balance, that few notice, and yet that soothes them all the same, that the great tomb does not stand alone upon its platform, but has, standing off to one side of it, a beautiful mosque of rose-red stone, a place of prayer with its own domes and its own arches, facing toward the holy west, and that on the other side of the tomb, exactly matching it, stands a second building, the very twin of the mosque in every line and stone, built for no purpose at all but this, that the eye coming upon the wonder should find it perfectly balanced. The same weight of beauty to the left as to the right, so that the entire vast composition rests in a deep and wordless symmetry, as still and as balanced as a face at peace. That is the kind of care that was poured into every part of it, to build a whole great building of red stone and white marble for no reason but that the picture should be balanced, that nothing should trouble the calm of the eye. Rest a moment in that thought, in the deep balance of the place, the tomb at the centre, the mosque to one side, its silent twin to the other, everything answering everything. Everything at rest. Now climb slowly the few broad steps up onto the great marble platform, and cross it toward the deep shadow of the central arch, and pass in, out of the bright hot day, through the tall doorway, into the cool dim hush within. And feel, at once, how the air changes, how it is cool here, always cool. However fierce the sun outside, the thick marble holding the coolness of the night long into the day, how it is dim. The harsh light of the day filtered soft and gold through screens of pierced marble, and how it is quiet. So quiet, with that deep gathered quiet that lives inside great domed buildings, where the smallest sound seems to hang in the air and travel up into the vault above and come back, slowly, changed and softened, a long time later. Let your eyes grow used to the dimness. All around you the white marble walls climb up into shadow, and here, close to, you can see the stone flowers we watched being made so long ago, the poppies and the lilies and the tulips of coloured stone set into the white, close enough now to touch, each petal its own sliver of carnelian or jade or amber, shaded from deep to pale, and the flowing bands of gold and black verse climbing the arches, speaking softly of mercy and of paradise, and the soul at peace returning home. And in the very centre, beneath the great swelling of the dome far above, stands the thing the whole wonder was raised to shelter, a screen of white marble carved so finely, pierced and fretted into so delicate a lace of stone that it seems less like stone than like something woven, or frozen out of frost. An 8-sided screen of marble lace standing around the resting place at the heart of it all, worked, too, with its own climbing flowers of coloured stone, and within that screen lie the two who loved each other, side by side, at the still centre of the still centre, beneath the dome, in the cool and the dim and the deep quiet, ringed by the marble lace and the stone flowers and the soft gold words. And if you stand there quietly, in the dim cool hush, and let a single soft sound be made, a low note, a whispered word, it rises up into the great hollow of the vault above, and comes drifting back down to you a long time afterward, softened and rounded and multiplied, hanging in the air, fading so slowly that you cannot say quite when it has gone. A long, slow breath of sound in the dark, the very voice of stillness itself. That is the sound at the centre of the marvel, the long soft dying echo beneath the vault. A sound made holy for peace, and there is nothing better in all the world to carry a weary soul down into sleep. Linger there in the coolness and the dim, with the gold light falling soft through the pierced screens of stone, and the inlaid blossoms of stone blooming silently around you, and the long slow echo fading above, and the two who had loved each other resting at the quiet centre of everything, at peace, and let the deep stillness of that place come into you and settle, and slow your breath, and slow your heart, and bear you down. Nothing waits here but coolness, and dimness, and quiet, and beauty, and rest. Never has there been anything here but that. Breathe slowly, and stay a while, in the cool dim heart of the pale marvel, where all is for ever calm, and now the long day of his life begins, itself to move toward its evening. And we will walk through that evening as gently and as quietly as we have walked through all the rest. For it is in its way the most peaceful part of the whole story. An old man and a great river and a white dome across the water. And very little else, and it will carry you gently down into sleep. The emperor grew old, as all men do, even the lord of that shining world. The grey that had come into his hair on the night he lost his beloved spread and whitened, and the years bore down, and the long labour of ruling the greatest empire on the earth, which he had carried for the better part of 30 years, grew heavy on him at last. He had reigned long, and by the measure of that hard age, well, he had made his country richer and more beautiful than he had found it. He had raised the wonder of the age, and a dozen lesser wonders besides. And now, as happens in the story of every great house, the time came for the empire to pass from the old hands into the young. And it passed, as it so often did among that line of proud and powerful men, not softly but with struggle. For he had grown 4 strong sons, and among 4 strong sons who each might wear the crown there is rarely an easy peace. We will not follow that struggle, dear listener, for it is a hard and a sorrowful business, and there is no rest in it. And this is a story told for rest. Let it be enough, and it is enough, to say that in the end it was one of his sons, the sternest and the most able of them, who gathered the empire into his own hands, and that the old emperor, in his last years, laid down the great weight of rule and passed out of the governance of the realm and into the quiet of his own evening. And here the chroniclers tell us a thing so gentle, in its way, so fitted to the whole shape of his life, that it seems almost as though the story itself had arranged it. But in his last years, The old emperor passed his days in the great rose-red fort at Agra, in a set of white marble rooms high up on the river wall of the palace, worked with the same inlaid blossoms he had loved all his life, cool and quiet and full of light. And from the windows and the open marble screens of those rooms, looking out and along the slow brown bend of the river, there stood, in plain and perfect view, only a little way downstream, shining above the water, the white wonder he had raised for the one he cherished. This is the deep reason, the reason we set aside, long ago, for the careful choosing of that particular bend of the river all those years before. He had built it where he could see it, and so the old man passed the long quiet evening of his life in a marble room that looked out across the river at the tomb he had built, and he could sit at the window in the cool hush of the morning and watch the first faint rose come up over it, just as we have watched it come up together tonight. And he could sit there again in the gold of the evening and watch the last light leave it. And he could see it, last of all, glimmering silver under the moon, floating above the dark water, doubled in the glass of the river. Day after day, season after season, through the last quiet years, the old emperor and the white dome across the slow brown water, keeping each other company in the evening of the world. The son who now held the throne, the sternest and most able of the four, had lodged his aged father in those marble rooms, and the old histories are gentle even here. The emperor, one of them records, was given chambers from whose windows he might look upon the tomb of the queen, and there he passed his days in prayer and in remembrance. Those near him recalled a thing he is said to have murmured, over and over, in that last quiet time. So long as my eyes can find her resting place, he would say, I am not truly parted from her. Of the daughter who tended him to the end, the histories say she never left his side, and read to him the poems he had loved as a boy, and eased his last days as a gentle hand smooths a pillow. And in a later age a great poet of that same land stood where the old emperor had stood, and tried to name what the white tomb was, and could not, and left us only these few words, a teardrop on the cheek of eternity. It is a picture of the deepest peace, when you rest in it, however it came to be. An old man, near the end of a long and a full and a mostly fortunate life, in a cool white room worked with flowers of coloured stone, with nothing left that he must do, and no more weight to carry, and no more battles to fight, sitting at a marble window in the warm still air, looking out across a great slow river at the loveliest thing in the world, which he himself had made, for love. His days were quiet now and gentle. His grandchildren were about him, we are told, and among them one granddaughter who loved him and tended him with great devotion all through those last years. So that he was not alone. He had his books, and the long poems he had loved since he was a boy, and the slow turning of the seasons over the river. The dry heat and the drumming rains and the cool gold winters, each in its turn, as it had turned over that country, since long before he was born, and would go on turning long after he was gone. And always, whenever he raised his eyes, there was the pale dome across the water, catching the light of every dawn and every dusk, so that even in those final years he was never truly parted from the one he had loved. For she lay resting beneath that dome, and he had only to look up to be near her. They say that on the clearest mornings he would sit long at the marble screen and speak to her across the water, softly, as though she might hear. See how the light comes to you first, he is remembered to have said, and how it lingers on you last of all. I have set you where the dawn must find you every day, so that you are never in the dark. There are far harder ways for a long life to end than that. And so, in the fullness of time, in the great rose-red fort at Agra, in his marble room above the river, with the white wonder shining across the water, and his granddaughter near him, the old emperor came at last to the end of his days, quietly, as an old man comes to sleep, and the long life that had begun in a warm palace in Lahore, in the cool quiet of a winter, near enough 75 years before, came softly to its close. He had been the joyous one, the treasured grandson of a great emperor. He had grown into the grave, able prince, He had been the king of the world, master of the wealthiest court on the earth, and he had been, above and through and beneath all of it, a man who had loved one woman with his whole heart for the whole of his life, and who, when he lost her, had turned his grief into the loveliest thing the world has ever seen. And now his own long story was told, and it was time for him to rest. And they laid him where surely, above all places on the earth, he would have wished to lie. They carried him the little way down the river, to the White Wonder itself, to the great cool hall beneath the dome, where all those years his beloved had lain alone at the very middle of the marble, beneath the swelling of the dome, ringed by the stone flowers and the bands of gold-lettered verse that spoke of paradise and of the soul's return to peace. Those gold-lettered verses had been chosen with care, and they are the gentlest words with which to lay the pair of them down. O soul, the writing reads, thou that art at peace, return unto thy Lord, well-pleased and well-pleasing, enter thou among the ranks of my servants, and enter thou into my garden. The old accounts say only, here lie the emperor and the queen he loved, side by side beneath the dome, and here they keep each other company through the turning of the years. And there, beside her at last, after the long years of the marble room and the river between them, they laid the old emperor down to his rest, so that they lie together now, side by side, at the still heart of the wonder he raised for her love, beneath the great dome, in the cool and the quiet and the changing light. While the seasons turn over the river outside, and the rose light comes up every dawn over the country, and warms the white marble and passes on, and comes again. They waited a long life to be together again in that place, and now they have all the time there is. Rest there with them a moment, in the deep cool hush beneath the dome, where it is always calm, and always cool, and the light comes down soft and dim through the marble screens, and the stone flowers bloom silently in the shadow, where the two who loved each other lie together at the centre of it all, at peace, at last, and forever. There is no sorrow left here now. There is only the great quiet, and the beauty, and the rest. Breathe slowly, and be at peace with them, in the cool dim heart of the pale marvel, on the bank of the slow brown river, where the long story comes gently to its close. The story of the man is told now, and told gently, and he is at rest. But the tale of the thing he made goes on, and it goes on to this very night. And it is a quiet and a wondrous thing to follow it down the long centuries, softly, to the world we live in now, and to see what became of the white wonder on the riverbank after the hands that raised it were all of them still. For empires, dear listener, do not last. That is the one sure thing the long history of the world has to teach us, and it is not a sad thing in the last reckoning, but a calming one on a quiet night to remember how the greatest of them rise, and shine, and pass, as the light passes over the marble from dawn to dusk. The great Mughal Empire, the richest court on the earth, the empire of the peacock throne, and the treasuries of pearl and the 20,000 craftsmen, went on for a time in its glory after the old emperor was laid to rest. And then, slowly over the long generations, as all empires do, it began to wane. The provinces loosened, the treasuries emptied. New powers rose in the country and beyond it. The great fabled throne of gold and jewels was carried off, in the end, by raiders from the north, and broken up, and scattered, and lost, so that no eye has seen it now for hundreds of years, and it lives only in the wondering descriptions of those who saw it long ago. The cities changed hands, and the gardens grew wild, and the long, slow tide of time washed over the whole shining world of the Mughals, and carried most of it away, as the river carries away everything, patiently at the last. But the great white marvel stood, through all of it, through the waning of the empire and the coming of new masters and the passing of century after century. The marvel above the river at Agra stood and shone and did not fall. There were hard years for it, years when it was neglected, years when it was stripped of some of its lesser treasures, years when the gardens ran wild and the fountains fell silent and the paths grew over. But the great white building itself, founded so deep and raised so true, and proportioned so perfectly by those patient long-dead masters, stood on through it all, above the brown river, catching the rose light of every dawn as it had caught it on the first morning, glimmering silver under the moon, doubled in the water whenever the water was still. The one thing of that whole vanished golden world that time could not carry away. Emperors and empires had come and gone all around it, and the throne of gold was scattered to the winds, and the peacock court was a memory in old books, and still the white dome stood above the river, more famous with each passing age, not less, until it had outlasted not only the man who built it and the empire he ruled, but very nearly everything else of its time upon the earth. There is a deep peace in that, on a quiet night, that of all the treasure and all the power of that wealthiest court. The one thing that endured, the one thing time could not take, was the thing that was made, not for power, but for love. A later historian, weighing what remained, put it simply. Of all the treasure of that empire, he wrote, the gold was carried off and the throne was broken and scattered, and only the tomb of the queen endured, for it had been raised for love and not for power, and love, it seems, outlasts even gold. And still, he added, they came, from every land under heaven, and each fell silent before it, and went away unable to say what he had seen. And as the centuries turned, and the world grew wider, and travellers began to cross the whole width of the world as never before, the fame of the marble marvel spread out from that riverbank until there was no corner of the world that had not heard of it. Men and women came from every country under the sun to stand before it, and every one of them, prince or poor pilgrim, scholar or simple wanderer, fell silent in the same way before the same beauty, and went home unable quite to say what they had seen, reaching always for the same helpless words, that it was not like a building at all, that it seemed to float, that it did not look as though human hands had made it, that it was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen or would ever see. Poets tried to catch it in verse and mostly gave up. Painters tried to catch it and mostly failed. And still they came, and still they come, in their millions now, every year, from every land, walking up the long path from the great gateway with the gentle verse written over it, and coming out into the garden and seeing it for the first time across the long still water, the pale dome with its 4 graceful towers doubled in the mirror of the pool, and stopping, every one of them, in the same hushed wonder, and simply looking, as the old emperor looked at it from his marble window across the river, the way you are looking at it now, in the warm dark, behind your closed eyes. One traveller who had come the long way from the cold countries of the West wrote home that words had failed him. I will say only, he set down, that there is nothing in all the world to set beside it, and that it seems the work not of men but of angels. For it belongs to the whole world now, in a way the marvel on the river bank. It is counted among the wonders of the world, on every list of the most beautiful and most marvellous things that human hands have ever made, and there is scarcely a soul alive, in any country, who does not know its shape. The great swelling dome and the 4 slender towers, so that a child who has never left home on the far side of the earth can draw it from memory, and knows, somehow, even without being told, what it means. For that is the last wonder of it, and the deepest, that of all the meanings a great building might carry. The meaning this one carries, all over the world, in every language, is love. It has become the shape that the whole turning planet reaches for when it wants to say that a love was true, and deep, and would not be forgotten. A man lost the one he loved 4 centuries ago in a tent by a river in a hot country, and rather than let her be forgotten he raised over her the most beautiful thing the earth has ever seen. And it worked beyond any dream he can have dreamed. For now the whole world knows, and will always know, that she was loved. There are not many stories, in all the long sorrowful history of the world, that ends so well as that. Hold it, softly, as you drift. Empires fall, and thrones are scattered, and the river carries almost everything away, in the end. But a thing made for love, made beautifully, and made to last, can stand above the water and shine dawn after dawn for 400 years, and reach, at last, to you tonight in the quiet dark, and tell you one more time that love can outlast almost anything. That is a good thought to fall asleep on. Let it settle over you now, warm and soft, like the earliest rose of dawn settling over the white marble in the hush before the dawn. So let us come, now, very slowly, to the end of our long night's walk, and let us not hurry it. For the ending of a story like this one should be as soft and as unhurried as the fading of the light, and there is nowhere left to go, and nothing left to do, but to gather the beautiful things we have seen, and to hold them, one last time, gently, as we drift down into sleep. We have wandered tonight across a great reach of distance and of time, the whole way to a warm, gilded land in the east, to the broad, unhurried rivers of northern India as they were some 4 centuries gone, and we have looked on a great deal of loveliness there, and none of it can do us any harm, and all of it is ours to keep. Let us move back through it once more, unhurried, as you might drift a last time through the rooms of a lovely house before you close the door and turn out the light. We beheld, at the outset, the warm land itself, its wide tawny rivers lying like beaten silver at first light, its level green fields and its groves of mango, the unhurried wheel of its seasons, the parching white heat and the warm drumming rains and the gilded chill of its winters. And far away northward, on the clearest of dawns, the faint blue rim of the great snows. And we beheld the golden realm that had settled in that land, the wealthiest court upon the earth, with its vaults of gold and pearl and emerald, its ateliers where the ablest artisans of half a continent stooped all day over the patient shaping of lovely things, its pleasure grounds laid to the ancient design of paradise, the water threading down straight bright runnels between the dark cypresses, the fruit trees ranked between, the fountains spilling in the deep green cool. Keep the gardens, gently as we pass, the runnels flowing, the cypresses dark against the dusk, the fountains spilling, the cool green hush of the marble pavilion, and the whole long afternoon with nothing in it that you have to do. And we came to know the man who stood at the middle of it all, the child of winter born to a warm palace at Lahore, called the joyous one by a grandsire who cherished him, reared among fountains and gardens and the ablest tutors of the realm, grown to a grave and capable prince who loved, beyond all else, beautiful things and the fashioning of them. And we saw him, on a lamplit evening of festival in a garden, catch his first sight of the girl he would love his whole life through, and wait for her, and wed her at last on a night woven all of gold and lamplight, and give to her a name the whole world would come to know, and love her alone. For the better part of 20 years, through every good season and every hard one, seldom far from her side. Keep that, gently, as well. The lamps in the branches of the garden, the pair of them side by side on the terrace at dusk, at ease in each other's company after so many years, watching the daylight drain from the sky and the lanterns rise on the dark and quiet water. We made our way, softly, through the one great grief, and we did not linger in it, and we came out again into the light. And we saw a man who had loved to fashion beautiful things turn his sorrow into the grandest fashioning the world has seen. We stood on the river bank at Agra on the morning the labour began, and we saw the marble travel across the whole parched land, block by pale block, on the tall wheeled wagons, hauled by the straining oxen and the patient elephants, and float the final quiet mile down the brown current. We watched the coloured stones arrive from half a world off, the green jade and the deep blue lapis pricked with gold, and the carnelian glowing orange, and we saw the marvel climb, over 20 patient years, the deep-set platform, the 4 graceful minarets tilting outward so faintly that no eye could catch it. The walls of unmarked white marble, and the great swelling dome lifting free against the sky. We saw the countless blossoms wrought of coloured stone, laid into the white so seamlessly that the hand meets one cool skin alone, flowering there for all time, and never falling. We saw the ribbons of flowing verse ascending the tall arches, so shrewdly graded that they seem, to the eye below, all of one calm and even size. And we beheld the long quiet runnel of water drawn straight toward it. So the whole white marvel stood twinned, once in stone against the sky, and once in the shivering glass of the pool, and we watched the daylight travel over it through a single turning day, from the earliest rose at dawn kindling on the golden spire atop the dome, downward over the swelling stone, warming it from ash through ivory to the gentlest flush of pink, through the brilliant white of the high blue forenoon and the drowsing gold of the long afternoon, to the deep honeyed amber of evening when the whole marvel glows as though a lamp burned inside it, and onward into dusk and the silver of moonrise, when the great dome floats pale and otherworldly above the darkened garden, twinned in the black mirror of the still pool, and the stars emerge one after another over the drowsing grounds, and we followed the aged emperor to the quiet evening of his own long life, to the cool white marble chamber in the great fort at Agra that gazed out over the river toward the marvel he had raised, where he lived out his final years in peace, never far from her, needing only to lift his eyes to be near her. And we laid him, at the last, at her side, in the deep cool stillness under the dome, where all is forever calm and forever cool, and the light descends soft and dim through the fretted screens. And the two who had loved each other lie together now at the quiet middle of everything, at peace and for always. And we watched the long centuries wheel over the white marvel, and saw the great empire dwindle and pass, and the throne of gold be scattered, and nearly all of that golden world be borne away in the end by the slow patient river of time, and saw that the one thing to last, the thing time could not carry off, was the thing that had been made, not for power, but for love, standing on above the water, shining, dawn upon dawn, for 4 centuries, until the whole turning world had come to know its shape, and to know that it stood for love, and would always mean love, for as long as it stood. That is the whole of it, dear listener. That is the story of the white wonder on the riverbank, and of the man who loved a woman so completely that he raised it in her memory, told softly, for the longest of nights, and it is finished now, and there is nothing left in it that can trouble you, only the beauty and the stillness and the rest. So let the story go now, gently, the way you let go of the last of the day. Let the land, the river, the golden court all grow soft and dim and far away, as a beautiful place grows dim behind you as you leave it in the dusk. There is nothing more to watch and nothing more to hold, and nowhere at all that you need to go. Come back, now slowly, to your own quiet room, to the warm still dark, to the pillow beneath your head and the covers drawn up warm around you. Feel the whole weight of your body held completely by the bed beneath you, so that you carry nothing at all, not the smallest thing. Let your shoulders come down one last soft inch. Let your hands lie open and still. Let your breath go slow and long and easy. The out-breath longer than the in-breath, each one carrying you a little deeper down into the warm and quiet dark. There is nothing you need to do now but this. There is nowhere you need to be but here. The day is over, and it is done, and it asks nothing more of you tonight. And if a single picture drifts up to you as you sink, let it be the one we started with, the one the old emperor loved beyond all others, the grey quiet before daybreak, the garden wet and soundless, the lone lamp burning low upon the marble terrace, and repeated in the dark, still water below. And then, by the smallest and slowest of degrees, the earliest blush of rose climbing up out of the east above the river, and the great pale dome beginning to gather it, warming softly through ash and ivory to the faintest tint of pink, glowing at the last like a lit pearl, twinned in the quiet, bright water, in the coolness and the silence of the morning. Hold that, and let it be the last of everything, and let it go soft. And let it fade, and let yourself go down with it into sleep. Good night, dear listener, good night. From a warm and golden country a long way east, from the pale marvel on the riverbank and the still water and the first rose light of the dawn. May the slow, soft turning of these centuries carry you gently down and gently through to the quiet morning. Rest now. Sleep deeply. Sleep well. Good night.